Good morning and welcome to another FasTrax webinar. This is a weekly event we do every Friday at 9 a.m. Central, 10 a.m. Eastern, where we go over various topics of the FasTrax software. You can see a list of these events if you go to our website, goftx.com, choose that FTX Lifeline button, scroll down just a bit and look for that webinar button, choose that, and that will show you a list of all of our previous webinars that have been recorded, where you can choose the View Recording button to view those upcoming webinars that you can register for, as well as the option to sign up for the newsletter to be reminded of upcoming webinars and other FasTrax news. Today, we're going to be going over a very important topic when it comes to your price book, and that's effectively managing your cost and price. So I'm going to take a look at Director here, and we're going to take a look at the very first thing that needs to be done, and that's going to be details on your items. So when it comes to managing your cost and price effectively, fast and easy, you need to make sure that you're properly utilizing your tree information. That's going to include like your major category, your category, manufacturer, product group, subgroup, class, and subclass. Now you don't have to go all the way down that tree, but it's important to at least have anywhere from 3 to 5 levels. That's a good way to really classify items that are very similar to one another together. That way, whenever you're updating cost, updating prices, placing items in discounts, buy downs, etc., that those items that are similar are classified together. And you can group those together instead of doing it item by item, use an entire filter that's an inclusive filter to tie those into your buy downs or system discounts. The benefit of having this is whenever you're utilizing mass updates. Whenever you look at your tree view here, for example, if I want to find this particular UPC here, I can just simply see these categorizations and then navigate down my mass updates tree to find that. So I can see it's SIG full price pack, ITG, and Winston for this particular item. So I can go to SIG full price, drop down to full price pack, ITG brands, Winston. I'm not only going to see this item here, the item that was on my item details page, but I'm going to see all other items that are classified in that same categorization. So whenever there's a price change or a cost change, I can quickly do this to not only the item that I was looking at in item details, but all items that are similar to that, because generally those are going to be changing at the same time. The idea behind this is to not do this one at a time, changing your cost, changing your price, and then saving it, but you're doing it by mass. That saves clicks, that saves times, and it makes a very tedious job very simple. So for example, let's say that I wanted to set a flat new cost and flat new price on these items here. Utilizing my tools down here, I can quickly do that. Now, when it comes to mass updates, first thing I tell everybody is to make sure anytime you use any of the tools down below is to always pay attention to what's in the grid and that number of items in your filter in that left corner of the grid. Whenever you're changing anything in this grid using these tools down here, it doesn't go based on what you have highlighted. It goes on what you actually visually see in that grid. So if I have, let's say, I go up to my major category of SIG full price, and let's say that I want to change just these camel items, I can't use these tools down here right now and it affect just those camel items. It would affect everything that I see on this screen here, including the items that I have to scroll down and see. So always make sure you're looking at what's in the queue that you can visually see, including if there's a scroll bar, and pay attention to that number you see in the grid that at the top corner of your grid. If you need to filter to something that you visually see in the grid that doesn't necessarily follow your categorizations, you can right-click those items and then filter based on selection. That will then filter to what you have highlighted. Then you can utilize the tools. So let's go back to my Winstons here. And let's say that I want to just set a flat price. I'm going to go here and I'm going to say I'm going to increase this to $10.15. Notice I have the set price tool set. I'm going to preview this. This window here is going to preview that change. So you're going to see your cost, your old price, your old margin based, of course, on your old price and your old cost, and then your new price, what you're trying to set that to, and then your new margin. Now, you can apply these changes immediately to one or multiple zones, depending on what you have checked in your price book zones. So if I choose apply changes now, I'm going to be applying that to just zone 0. It's going to immediately make that change. And then these, since I'm in a corporate environment, those pricing records are now going to be sitting in my queue. I can go to my queue and then I can send down those changes to all the applicable stores that were in that price book zone. So let's go back to that screen here. For information on utilizing the queue, I'd highly recommend you watch the queue webinar where we go over all the details of the queue. So let's say that I want to change the cost of my items. Well, I can go to my cost updates tool. Let's say I want to set a flat cost. I can put in my value here. And let's say that I want this to affect more than one zone. I can choose that other zone. I can first analyze and make sure that what I want to change is indeed what it should be, looking at my margins and the old cost and new cost, and I can go ahead and apply that. Now, there's other tools you can utilize when it comes to mass updates that isn't just changing a flat value. You can add a dollar amount or add a percentage. You can include rounding or not include rounding. So let's say that I want to add a dollar amount to this, a nickel. Whenever I preview that change, I'm going to see that there's my old price, there's my new price. It's actually adding a nickel to that value. Let's say that I want to do the opposite of that. You can just simply throw a negative sign in front of that value. Preview that, and it will then remove 5 cents from your price. Now, let's say this change is going to be happening a month from now. You're going to be on vacation, you're the price book administrator. What you can do is you can actually schedule this change to occur. Now, this is not really a new feature, but I've seen quite a number of clients that actually do this a different way that is not really recommended. You would not want to hit apply changes and then schedule your queue. So if I do apply changes right now, and then I go to my queue and I don't send those queue records out, I schedule those queue records, there's a problem. The problem is that my corporate price book is now changed, but the stores, they're not. So there's a discrepancy there. Corporate doesn't match the stores for that price book zone. Well, let's say in between that time period of when it's scheduled to go out, someone comes in there, they save an item whenever they're adding it to a discount or a buy down or making some kind of change, saving a vendor part. That new price change is going to go down to the store immediately before that scheduled queue record because the item was saved. There's a problem there. You don't want that to occur. That's why you need to utilize the built-in scheduler on this screen. Let's say this is going to happen at the end of the month. I would want to go ahead and put in the time that I want this to go down, scheduling that change to occur, and then hit the schedule button. That would then make this occur, both sending the price change down as well as changing the corporate value on the 31st at midnight. Between now and then, that date, the corporate price has not changed at all. It's only going to change at that scheduled time. So this is the proper way that needs to occur when it comes to scheduling your price changes. Don't schedule your queue records because that's potentially asking for trouble. Now, when it comes to doing percentage values, it's the same way. You can add a percentage or remove a percentage value from your cost and or price. Preview window works the same. You can have that apply immediately or schedule that to occur in advance. Rounding, this will round up to a nickel or up to 9 cents. when it comes to your price updates. Let's take a look at an example here. Let me first add up just a penny where it's 10.16 on all these items. And then notice that I had round 9 up selected. Even though I was adding a penny, it's going to round up to 9 cents. So if you want your pricing consistent on shelves, on like shelf tags, you can utilize these round up options to where it's going to round up to the closest 5 cents or 9 cents. That's a great way to make sure that all your pricing looks consistent and pretty on the shelf. Now, there's also the option to set your prices based on margin. So of course, you want to first make sure you have your costs set appropriately, and then you can go to your gross margin price updates. Let's say that right now we can say I'm making a 9.72% margin on these items. Let's say I want to make a 12% margin. I don't know what that value would be off the top of my head, but whenever I preview this, it's going to show me. It's going to get as absolute close as possible to that 12% margin as it can to the actual penny decimal place. In this case, it would have been 10.45. So what you can do is you can have your department set for a certain margin to be made, certain categories. You can quickly go into those categorizations here. Say I'm going to my full price carton and I want all my Winstons to be a 12% margin. I can go to my cartons here. I can put in 12. It'll show me what that change would be. The old value, the new value. Whenever I apply that, now those items have a 12% margin. So if you do all your pricing based on margin, you can definitely do that. Very fast, very easy. Notice there's also the tools here to round up. So here you can round up to the closest nickel, round up to the closest 9 cents. You can round up or down based on that value, what it would be. So if you want to round up whatever's closer, is it closer to a nickel, 25 cents, 35 cents, 45 cents, or is it closer to 9 cents whenever you're setting that margin? Or round up or down to the 9 cents. So is it closer to 10.19 or 10.09 when you're setting that price? If it's 10.15, the price, it would round up to 10.19. If the price was being set to 10.11, it would round down to 10.09. And then you can round up to the closest 99 cents. Now, this is a relatively new checkbox here, the primary part cost. What this is for is if you have an item that has multiple vendor parts, as in a vendor part from multiple vendors, you can designate one of those vendors as a primary vendor part. So if I go to my vendor parts here, and I'm looking at a vendor part, I can designate this as a is primary. Now, the is primary part, that's generally going to be whenever you receive this item, you're 99% of the time receiving it from this primary vendor. You're receiving it against this vendor part. Very rarely, if ever, would a vendor part on an item from two separate vendors be the exact same cost. You're generally going to pay a different value depending on the vendor. Whenever you're setting your gross margin, or in this case, markup values, you can do that against the primary part cost rather than the last cost. So if you're always going to receive this item from, let's say, the vendor you have selected here, in this case, demo vendor 1, it's going to set that markup value or gross margin value against that primary part cost, not necessarily your last cost. So that's how that functions. That's a great way to, if you have to receive, say your main vendor's out of stock of a group of items for a certain period of time. That's very likely happened during this COVID pandemic, but this is a great way to make sure that your margins are indeed what they should be. When it comes to your cost updates, here's where you can do the same thing as our price updates, but notice there's a checkbox here to update the vendor part, if you want to apply that cost change to the vendor part, and also if you want to update the last cost. Here's the option to choose the vendors that you have. So if I want to update, say this item, I'm applying doing my cost changes, and I want it to apply to, if there's a vendor part for vendor part number 2, I can choose that checkbox, and this will update, depending on these settings here, it would add basically 9.2% to my vendor part for demo vendor 2, but not update my last cost. If I have that checked, it would then update my last cost. Now, generally, you're going to update the last cost whenever you receive the items. So let's go and take a look at one of the really handy ways of handling your cost updates. Because generally, you're going to have a vendor part cost. Let's look at item up here real fast. You're going to have a vendor part cost and a last cost. Some cases, if you have average cost enabled, you could have an average cost. Those don't necessarily have to match. As we've gone over in our other webinars, the vendor part cost is going to be if you purchase this item right now, what is that going to cost you? It's effectively like the live price of that item if you're purchasing it from a vendor. Then you have the last cost. The last cost would be the last time you purchased this item on an invoice from a vendor, any vendor. What did you pay for it? And then the average cost is going to be based on your current inventory and past invoice that you've received. What is that average cost of all the times you've received that item at? So these probably won't match all the time. So let's take a look at the invoice cost change report on how we can manage our pricing, our cost against what we receive on invoices. So by default, first, whenever you're receiving an invoice, let's pull an item up here. There's an invoice. We can see we have a cost. This cost is yellow. It's highlighted yellow. What that tells us is that on this particular invoice here, there was a cost change. Every one of these are yellow. So that means every one of these items had a cost change on it. What that means is whenever I received this invoice, I had to change the cost. It wasn't, whenever I applied it to my inventory, it wasn't the same as it was before. By default, the system's going to update those costs. So there's a checkbox here. By default, that's checked because you want to update your cost. You always want to know what your accurate last cost would be. So when you're setting your pricing, you're setting your margins accurately. Whenever we go to our inventory reports here, we go to our invoice cost change report. Let's say I want to look at every one of my vendors and I want to look at a date range. Let's say that I want to go back to the 15th of September and look through today. There's a checkbox here called Show as Worksheet. If I have this unchecked, it's going to be just a regular generic report. But if I have this actually checked, whenever I press this button, it's going to bring it up in a worksheet form. This worksheet form is really, really neat in the fact that whenever I'm looking at it, I can see all my cost changes. I can see what the old value was, what the new value is, what invoice that occurred on. Here's the invoice date. There's invoice number, what the vendor part being affected is, and then my old retail, my old margin, and it's going to suggest me a new retail based on that same margin. So I don't have to go in mass updates or item details and change my retail prices. I can run this worksheet here, look at all my cost changes that occurred in that time frame for those selected vendors, and then use the tools here to automatically update my retail price. Now down here, there's your tools. There's your rounding options, round up to the nickel, round up to 9 cents, or round up or down to the closest 9 cents. If I want to apply this cost change, I'd make sure that I check those applicable checkboxes. And then if I want to apply this to the entire zone, I can choose the apply cost changes to that zone. I can do apply just my price changes and leave my cost alone, or I can do both. Whenever you apply this will then, in this case, since both are selected, update my vendor part cost for that particular item, update my last cost for that item, and update my retail price to these values here, getting it as close to these margins as possible. You just simply choose the apply button, and then that change happens. You then go to your queue. I'm not going to do that now, but I'm going to go to my queue, and you would send those changes down to the store, and now everybody's on the same page. Corporate and the stores match for their cost and price. All right, so I hope everybody learned something new today and had a good review. Once again, these webinars, they happen every Friday at 9 a.m. Central, 10 a.m. Eastern. You can see a list of these if you go to our website, goftx.com, choose the FTX Lifeline button, scroll down just a bit, look for that webinar button. That webinar page will show you all of our previous webinars that are recorded, the option to sign up for new webinars, and then the option to register for the newsletter that lets you know of other FasTrax news and other webinars that are upcoming. If you have any questions on this topic, let us know at websupport@FasTraxPOS.com. And if you have any questions or suggestions for future webinar topics, let us know at info@goftx.com. Thank you and have a great weekend.